Hello everyone, my name's Chloe Maxmin. Some of you have heard me tell my story a billion times. Some of you haven't, but I've been really lucky in my life to work with young people and experience the power that we have together. I've lived these two examples of what I call first here then everywhere, which is young people starting off with something really small just because they're passionate about it and it exploding into something really, really big. I'm 25 years old now, so I think I'm kind of at the end of my youth credentials. No? Okay. But I started this work when I was 12. So I grew up on a farm in Maine. We raised deer. And for as long as I can remember, the thing that I've been passionate about the most, the thing that I've loved the most is my home. I've loved our animals. I love the lake that I grew up on. I love Maine. And I realized when I was 12 that I would do anything to protect Maine, including devote my entire life to fighting climate change. The thing that led me to that realization was Plum Creek. It's funny how bad things can show you good ways, right? So Plum Creek is a big real estate development company, if y'all aren't familiar with this thing. They wanted to develop Maine's North Woods, especially the area around Moosehead Lake, which is an area I've spent a lot of time in my childhood. And it was the first time that I was exposed to the powers that be and how they're threatening the home that we love. So I started to get involved. Ooh, no, you're seeing my next slide. Okay. I started to get involved. I would write letters to the editor. I would just kind of scroll through all of the different newspapers in Maine and write letters to them. And I would testify at public hearings around Plum Creek. And then when I got to high school, I went to Lincoln Academy. I wanted to get all of my friends involved because it really sucks doing this work by yourself. But there was no environmental club at Lincoln Academy, so I started this thing called the Climate Action Club. And our mission was to provide opportunities for people both at Lincoln and in the community of Damariscotta to provide them with opportunities to fight climate change. So I would get my friends to come to these public hearings and testify with me. We did a lot of really, really cool stuff. We did a reusable bag campaign. So we developed this model where we went around to different local businesses and we asked them to donate, and in return they would get their logo on our reusable bags. So we used all that money to buy bags for our town, and we sold them in 14 local shops, including Hannaford. And we used all the proceeds to buy more bags. We ended up saving 700,000 plastic bags from local landfills every year. So that was a really exciting campaign that involved adult allies and people in the community. It was very powerful. We also, this is how I met Andy, we did a no idling campaign during our 30-minute lunch break. Me and anyone else who felt inspired would go out and knock on any driver who was idling. We knock on their windows and give them this little card and ask them to turn off their cars. We had 5 buses that would idle for an hour every day before the end of school just because, and we got them to stop doing that. So it was really about raising awareness at Lincoln Academy about how our individual and everyday behaviors are impacting the climate. And it seems basic to me now, but back then it was very new for me and it was very new for everyone at my high school. So the Climate Action Club kept going, kept building. We ended up realizing that we needed money to do a lot of the things that we wanted to do, so we would apply for grants. And when you win a grant in the youth world, it often comes with some kind of recognition. And so we kept getting these grants, and people kept learning about our work. And we became kind of famous. Like the Sundance Channel came to Damariscotta to film us for one of their documentary series, and we had people reaching out to us from all over the world asking, like, how did you do this in your high school? And then our crowning achievement was we won $5,000 to install solar panels on Lincoln Academy, which was the first time that a school had installed solar panels without any kind of government aid in Maine. So that was exciting, and if you drive by Lincoln today, you can still see the 4 solar panels up there. So with the Climate Action Club, I'd never been involved with youth activism before, And I had no idea what I was doing, but like no one else did either. And we ended up creating this really powerful movement that changed the minds of me, everyone I worked with, everyone in our school, and a lot of people in our community. So I called this realization first here then everywhere, which is the idea that no matter who you are, no matter where you're from or how small your town is, that you can make a difference and inspire others to do the same. Okay, so then I went to college. I went to Harvard, which I say with a little bit of shame, but mostly, yeah, like this much pride. And when I went to Harvard, I learned about, when you go to college, you learn about the world in a way that you never saw it before. And the thing that I learned about was the total consuming power of the fossil fuel industry. And there was another impetus for this realization, which was the Portland-Montreal pipeline, which is a pipeline that currently exists. It currently carries oil from Portland to Canada. There was a massive proposal to reverse the flow of this pipeline and bring tar sands from Canada to Portland, South Portland to be exact, and then export it. For a whole bunch of reasons, this was a really horrible idea, including the fact that this pipeline was built in the 1960s and was never meant to carry tar sands, which is very viscous, like sandpaper, and would corrode this pipeline. The pipeline runs within yards of Sebago Lake, which is the drinking water source for 20% of Maine's population. It runs right into Casco Bay, which is, as we all know, is a huge part of Maine's economy, so a really, really bad idea. But the thing that really caught my attention about the Portland-Montreal pipeline is that it's 76% owned by Exxon. So I had no idea that these kinds of powerful forces were operating in Maine and threatening my home. So I was still at school in Massachusetts, though. And this was also at the same time that Bill McKibben wrote that article in Rolling Stone called Global Warming's Terrifying New Math, which really changed the climate movement. And at the end of that article, he alluded to launching a new movement around fossil fuel divestment. It was a very subtle thing, but it really grabbed my attention because it was like, okay, let's divest from the fossil fuel industry. Which company do I really not like right now? It's Exxon. So I co-founded Divest Harvard to get my school, Harvard, to stop investing in Exxon, which is threatening my home, Maine. Harvard's endowment is always changing, but right now it's about $37 billion. It's the largest endowment on the planet, the largest endowment on the planet, the largest nonprofit on the planet, with the exception of the Vatican. So we were calling on Harvard to divest from the top 200 publicly traded fossil fuel companies, because why would our university invest in companies that are threatening its students' futures? Divest Harvard literally began with 3 people. At our first meeting, we had 10 people in a room. We watched this little intro to climate change thing, because no one at Harvard really talked about climate change unless you were in a science class. And then we began the process of building a movement. The first thing that we did was we had a vote on campus. We asked every college student to say, to answer the question, should we divest from fossil fuels? 72% of students who voted said yes. This was the first referendum on fossil fuel divestment in the world, and it launched us to the front page of the New York Times, quite literally. So then everyone was like, oh, you're in the New York Times, now you're legitimate, let's join. So we started to, that's how Harvard works. So we started to build a movement. And at Harvard, there hadn't really been any kind of big grassroots activism since the early 2000s during the living wage campaign. So we were really starting from scratch. We did like a lot of basic organizing stuff to begin with. When we first got to meet with our administration, we got all of these students to stand outside the building or inside the building and hold signs as the trustees would walk by us. We would organize all these rallies in Harvard Yard and just screamed as loud as we can, divest, divest, put fossil fuels to rest. We had a lot of educational forums as well, because when you're organizing a big campaign, it's important that people have opportunities to understand what you're organizing about. So we would have faculty and students be on panels, and hundreds of people would come and learn about fossil fuel divestment. And then we began the process of escalation, getting a little bit more confrontational, because our administration would not listen to us. our trustees would tell us things like, we should thank BP, not divest from them. And our president would say, the endowment isn't a political tool, which is BS because we're investing in one of the most dangerous and deadly industries in the world, so it is already political. Our first step of escalation was this picture right here. Our president was giving a really big speech in Sanders Theater, which holds hundreds and hundreds of people, and we sat in the front row wearing these Divest t-shirts. And she wouldn't come out on stage for 20 minutes. She brought the campus police in to watch us to make sure we didn't do anything. But we just sat there. And then we really got serious. We wanted to have a public dialogue with our president about fossil fuel divestment, and she wouldn't do it. We weren't even saying, like, you need to divest right now. We were just saying, can we talk about this in public? This is a university after all. And she refused, so we decided to blockade her office building. This was in our second year of organizing, so we had been through multiple meetings, we had been building our base on campus, and we weren't really getting anywhere. So we got 40 kids, this isn't everyone, but we got 40 kids to wake up at 5 a.m. One morning in April and sit outside her office building. We had 6 people risking arrest, which was a really big thing, and that top right photo is the cops coming to tell us that they were going to arrest us. And they didn't. They let us sit there for about 30 hours in the freezing cold and rain. And then in the next morning, they pulled this really fancy maneuver to isolate one of us, one of my best friends, Brett, and they arrested him. Brett was the first student arrested at Harvard since the Vietnam War protests, and he was the first person arrested in the fossil fuel divestment movement. So we were shocked that happened. This was our messaging. Harvard trustees would rather arrest their own students and openly discuss fossil fuel divestment. It was really a shocking thing. But still, no matter how much pressure the media built, no matter how many people we had on campus, no matter how many alumni we had supporting us, Harvard wouldn't do anything. The other big thing that happened while we were blockading is we had a petition go viral, and over 65,000 people signed a petition while we were blockading in those 30 hours, calling on Harvard to divest. So by the time Brett was arrested, we had over 70,000 people who had signed on to our campaign and who were publicly calling on Harvard to act on climate. But that didn't matter. Harvard still didn't do anything, so we got even more serious. We fasted for a week. We did a sit-in inside our president's office building, like her office is right around that corner, but the police blocked the bathroom, so we had to leave after 24 hours because, physics. And then we had a bunch of our members were at Harvard Law School. We had a very intergenerational, interdisciplinary movement. And they wrote and filed their own lawsuit suing Harvard for failing to divest, and so there were 6 student plaintiffs. It was rejected, but we were and still are the only student movement to sue Harvard or any university over divestment. Still, Harvard didn't do anything, so we did this thing called Harvard Heat Week. This was when I was a senior. We shut down our president's office building and then another administrative building for a week. We had thousands of alumni come back to campus, hundreds of community members get involved. We kicked it off in a local church. We had Darren Aronofsky and Cornell West and Bill McKibben come and speak. We had events and rallies all day, and we all slept outside these doors for an entire week, and no one from the administration could go in and do their work. People saw them in Starbucks, like answering their emails and stuff. And we had civil disobedience trainings every day, and we had so many people willing to get arrested that we would just find new buildings to blockade. Or like we knew that our president had a meeting in this building, so we would go over there and put ourselves in arrestable positions. And Heat Week was really incredible. It was the largest climate rallies that Harvard has ever seen. We had hundreds and hundreds of people come out on our final days. Just like, this is a little hard to tell, but that's 500 people right there outside Harvard Science Center marching through Harvard Yard. And I have a quick video that kind of shows the scope. This is in our 3rd year of organizing, right? 70,000 people strong. And we had this moment where we were trying to think of new things to do with all of these people who wanted to get arrested. So one of the things we decided to do was to create a circle around this building, which is called University Hall. We had been blockading it all morning, and we were going to end our blockade and then hold hands around the building. And so we were getting ready to do this, and we were like, oh my God, we don't have enough people. This is so embarrassing. We had a 70-foot-long banner that we had made, and we were going to use that to make sure we could reach around the building. And so we got everyone to hold hands, and we started to walk around the building, and we quickly realized that we actually had a ton of people there. And this circle is everyone holding hands, and it continues all the way. If you've ever been to Harvard Yard before, there's a whole nother green. So we basically encircled Harvard Yard. And I have a quick video of that. Oopsies. So you can get a sense of the scale of what happened at Heat Week. And one of my favorite things about this video is that the two girls in the middle, Jasmine and Talia, they joined Divest Harvard less than a year before. They quickly became the leaders of the group. They're the ones who coordinated and organized this entire week, and they found themselves in the middle of a circle of 500 people yelling at the top of their lungs. So, it's pretty incredible. That's the video. So despite that, Harvard still didn't do anything. And in fact, this is the week of graduation. We were just all so over Harvard's intransigence at this point. Harvard hired an oil executive to run its finances. So we got really good at blockading, and we just went and did another blockade because why not? And then this is after my graduation. Divest Harvard still continues. We made sure that we had young leaders leading the group before I graduated. We had 4 students get arrested outside the office of where Harvard's endowment is managed. So 4 people arrested. Then they blockaded University Hall again. And then, this was in April of this year, the guy who runs the natural resources part of Harvard's endowment, which is only about $1 billion out of $37 billion, but still something. He got up at an event and he said that that portion of the endowment is no longer invested in fossil fuels and that it would be immoral to do so. So that was a huge moment because it means that some of Harvard's endowment is divested from fossil fuels and that we did have an impact on the people who manage the endowment. So the movement still continues today, but it had a little win to help it along. So after I graduated from Harvard, I became very interested in how the climate movement can become a more effective political force. The purpose of divestment was to weaken the fossil fuel industry's influence so that we can have more room for the people to influence our policies and push for bold climate policy. But the divestment movement wasn't really pivoting to create opportunities for people to get politically involved. And I called that the mobilization gap, and I wrote my thesis on it. I then was working at The Nation as a writer, writing about how the climate movement can become a more politically effective force. I went to COP21, which was a major political landmark where the first international climate agreement was created. And as all these young people were marching here in Maine, there were a lot of young people in these very elite, exclusive spaces at COP trying to push for bold climate policy and to influence all of these leaders, mostly men, who were really threatening our future. So I like this juxtaposition because this is inside the conference space, which is very sterile and like a lot of important people making decisions. But then with the young people that I was with, we would wake up at 4 a.m. every morning and have our strategy sessions and figure out what actions that we were going to do. And there was just so much power and so much love and so much purpose with this group of people. But still our voices weren't heard. So the conclusion I came to at the end of COP is that we need a new kind of politics, because our political system at COP kind of functioned to the best that it could. 195 countries agreed on a Paris climate agreement. I mean, that is a huge feat of compromise. But we can't, this is another example of like the kind of compromise that happened at COP. Obama was there, and he was very supportive of the Paris Agreement, but at the same time, he was writing all these permits for pipelines. And so I realized that the way in which we engage with politics and the kind of policy that we need is unlike anything that we've seen before. And when we think about creating a new kind of politics, creating something that the world hasn't seen before, we can't really act like we've been before. And I called that no more human as usual. We need to find new ways of being on this planet, because the ways that we act right now are so destructive. And from my experience, the people who can always find these new creative, democratic, inclusive, and powerful ways to make decisions, to organize people, to create power and purpose, it's always young people. And I call that the radical now. At Divest Harvard, for example, I mean, we were a small group, but we made all of our decisions by thumbs up, thumbs down, I don't care, or abstain. And that process of having every voice heard, having the power to abstain, it meant that that's why people wanted to be part of this group, because they knew that their voices were heard and their voices were valid. So I am a big believer in transferring the power and the insight of youth into political spaces, but also all decision-making spaces. Youth are often overlooked because, as I was telling Susan before, we're naive, we're idealistic, we want things that can't happen. But to me, that's its own form of expertise. That is the clear-sighted right and wrong that we need in this world. And it breaks my heart when those voices are discarded. So, you know, as older people, like I include myself in that, in this room, you know, I always want to give young people the power and resources that they deserve to have their voices heard. And like I love how Spencer Thibodeau was talking about welcoming young people into the political space, because that's what we need. And yeah, youth are going to be the people who help us find the path forward. So thank you for listening to me. So the question was about our Children's Trust, which is a group that has been supporting young people who have been suing their governments over climate change. And the big thing happening right now is a few years ago, 21 youth plaintiffs sued the Obama administration for failing to act on climate, and that lawsuit has been making its way up through the courts and is still very active. So now they're technically suing the Trump administration. And if these young people win the lawsuit, it will force the federal government to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So it's all part of what I think is a really cool legal component to the climate movement. People using really innovative legal tactics to support youth, to support people who are doing civil disobedience, and to support people who are directly fighting fossil fuel infrastructure projects.